she said, "I'm too big to be loved." But the cowboy proved her wrong. Wild West miracle story. The woman had lived in the town for so many years that people barely noticed her anymore. She was always there before sunrise and still working after sunset. Her hands were rough, her shoulders strong, and her body bigger than most women in the town. Some people said she was built like the land itself, wide, steady, and unbreakable. But no one ever asked how heavy that land felt to carry alone. She lived in a small wooden house at the far edge of town, where the dust settled thick and the wind howled at night. The house wasn't pretty, but it was clean. She kept it that way because cleaning was easier than thinking. When she scrubbed the floor or washed her clothes, her mind went quiet. Silence was safer than memories. From the time she was young, she had learned one hard lesson. She was different. Other girls wore pretty dresses and laughed in groups. They were chosen for dances and spoken to gently. She was chosen for work. "You're strong," people told her. "You can lift that. You can handle this." At first, she felt proud. Being strong meant being useful. Being useful meant being needed. But as the years passed, she noticed something painful. No one ever looked at her the way men looked at other women. No one ever spoke to her softly. No one ever waited for her to smile. When she passed by the saloon, the laughter would grow quieter. When she entered the general store, conversations paused. People didn't mean to be cruel. At least, that's what she told herself. But their eyes said everything. They saw her size before they saw her heart. They saw her strength before they saw her kindness. At night, she would sit alone on her small porch, listening to the wind move through the tall grass. She wondered what it felt like to have someone sit beside her, close enough to feel their warmth. She wondered what it would be like to be chosen, not because she could work, but because someone wanted her. But those thoughts always ended the same way, with a quiet laugh and a shake of her head. "That's not for someone like me," she would whisper to the dark. Over time, that whisper turned into a belief, and that belief became her truth. She told herself love was meant for smaller women, softer women, women who didn't take up so much space in the world. She told herself she was too big to be loved. Every morning she put on her plain clothes and tied her hair back tight, as if hiding even more of herself would make things easier. She walked into town with her eyes down, ready for another day of being invisible. The men nodded at her like they would a fence or a horse. Useful, reliable, but not something to admire. The women spoke to her kindly but never closely, like there was an invisible wall she could never cross. Still, she helped everyone. She carried heavy crates, fixed broken fences, and worked longer hours than anyone else. When a neighbor was sick, she brought food. When a child fell, she lifted them up. She gave pieces of herself away every day, hoping that someday someone would notice what was left. But no one did. The loneliness didn't come all at once. It grew slowly, like a shadow stretching longer each year. She got used to eating alone. She got used to walking home alone. She got used to silence being her only company. And when you get used to something long enough, you stop fighting it. You start to believe it's all you deserve. One evening, after a long day of work, she sat on her porch and watched the sky turn orange and then purple. The town lights flickered in the distance, warm and full of life. Somewhere people were laughing, talking, sharing stories. She could almost hear the music drifting on the wind. Her chest tightened. She pressed her hand against her heart and took a slow breath. "This is just how it is," she told herself. "Some people are meant to be loved. Some are meant to work." Saying it out loud made it sound true. Saying it out loud made it hurt less. She didn't know that this belief, this quiet sadness she carried like a heavy coat, was about to be tested. She didn't know that the story she had told herself for years was about to change. All she knew was that she was tired, and tomorrow would be another long day. As she went inside and closed the door, the wind picked up outside, sweeping across the land like a promise. But she didn't hear it. She had learned not to listen to hope. The next morning began like every other morning, quiet and heavy. The woman woke before the sun, pulled on her boots and stepped outside while the air was still cold. The land was silent, except for the sound of wind moving through the grass. She liked this hour. No eyes watching, no voices judging, just her and the work that needed to be done. She walked toward the stable at the edge of town, carrying a bucket of water. As she moved, she noticed something different. A horse stood near the fence, tall and strong, with a man beside it. The man wasn't from the town. She knew that at once. The townspeople were familiar like old furniture, worn, quiet, predictable. This man moved differently. He stood easy, like the road itself had shaped him. His hat was low, his clothes dusty, and his eyes were calm but sharp, as if they noticed everything. She slowed her steps without realizing it. Travelers came through sometimes, but they rarely stayed. They usually passed through like the wind, stopping only for food or supplies. This man, though, wasn't rushing. He was brushing his horse, speaking softly to it, like time was something he had plenty of. She turned her eyes away, reminding herself not to stare. It was none of her business. She walked into the stable and began her work, feeding the animals and cleaning the stalls. Still, she felt something strange, like the air had shifted. She tried to ignore it. A while later, she heard footsteps. "Morning!" a voice said. She froze. People didn't usually greet her unless they needed something lifted or fixed. She turned slowly. The cowboy stood a few steps away, his hat pushed back just enough for her to see his face clearly. He looked tired, but not worn. His eyes were kind, and when he smiled, it wasn't quick or careless. It was real. "Morning," she answered, her voice lower than she meant it to be. "I was told I could find water for my horse here," he said. She nodded and pointed. "Over there." "Thank you," he said. But instead of walking away, he stayed. "You work here?" "Yes." "You've got the place running smooth," he said, looking around. Animals seemed calm. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever noticed that before. She shrugged. "I just do my job." "Well," he said, lifting the bucket, "you do it well." Those simple words stayed with her long after he walked away. For the rest of the day, she kept seeing him around town. He spoke to people easily, helped a man fix a wagon, laughed with a shop owner, and even sat with a group of old men outside the saloon. But what surprised her most was this. Every time he passed her, he nodded or smiled. Not like she was part of the background, but like she was someone worth seeing. It made her uneasy. At lunch, she sat on a wooden step, eating bread and cheese. She liked to be alone during breaks. It gave her time to breathe. Just as she took her first bite, a shadow fell across her feet. "Mind if I sit?" the cowboy asked. She looked up, confused. You can, if you want." He sat beside her, leaving space, not too close, not too far. He ate quietly for a moment, then said, "Name's Eli." She hesitated. "I know." He smiled. "And yours?" No one had asked her that in a long time. Not in a way that sounded like they cared, she told him. "That's a good name," he said. "Fits you." She almost laughed. "Fits me how?" "Strong," he said simply. "Honest." She looked away, unsure how to take that. Compliments had always felt like clothes that didn't fit. Too tight. Too strange. "You don't know me," she said. "Not yet," he answered, and there was no hurry in his voice. From that day on, Eli found small reasons to talk to her. He asked about the town, about the land, about her work. He listened when she answered, really listened, like her words mattered. She wasn't used to that. Most people talked over her or around her. He spoke with her. At first, she kept her guard up. She told herself he was just being polite. Travelers were like that, kind one day, gone the next. She had learned not to expect more. But days passed, and he didn't leave. He stayed to help repair fences. He helped bring supplies from the next town. He even worked beside her in the stable one afternoon, laughing when he dropped a bucket and soaked his boots. She hadn't laughed like that in years. The sound surprised her, like it came from someone else. One evening, as the sun fell low, they walked together toward the edge of town. The sky was wide and golden, and the air felt soft. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She shook her head. "This is where I belong." "Because it's all you've known?" he asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Finally she said, "Because the land needs me." He stopped walking and looked at her. "And what about what you need?" No one had ever asked her that. "I don't know," she said honestly. Eli nodded like that answer made sense. "Sometimes," he said, "we get so busy being what everyone else needs we forget ourselves." She felt something twist in her chest. Not painful, not pleasant, just deep. That night she lay awake in her bed staring at the ceiling. His words replayed in her mind. His smile, his easy way of seeing her. It scared her more than loneliness ever had, because loneliness was safe, hope was not. The next day she tried to avoid him. She worked faster, stayed in the stable, kept her eyes down. But he found her anyway, not in a way that felt like chasing, but like he already knew where she would be. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said too quickly. He studied her face. "You don't look all right," she sighed. "Why do you keep talking to me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He blinked, surprised. "Because I like you." Her heart skipped hard, then fell. "You shouldn't," she said. "Why not?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The words lived inside her like a locked door. Eli didn't push. He just nodded. "All right," he said. "But I'm not going to stop being kind to you." And he didn't. Days turned into a week, and the town began to notice. People whispered. They watched. Some smiled, some frowned. She felt their eyes, but for the first time, she didn't shrink under them. When Eli walked beside her, the world felt a little quieter, a little kinder. Still, fear followed her like a shadow. Every good moment came with a warning in her mind. This will end. Don't believe in it. She didn't know that the real test was coming. That, the belief she had carried for so long, that she was too big to be loved, was about to be spoken out loud. The change did not come all at once. It came slowly, like a crack forming in a wall that had stood for years. Every day Eli stayed in the town, the woman felt that wall weaken. She still woke before sunrise, still worked until her hands ached, but something inside her was different. There was a small warmth now, a quiet light she tried to ignore. Eli became part of her routine without forcing his way in. Some mornings he helped her carry water. Other days he fixed broken boards or brushed the horses while she worked. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just worked in silence, and that silence felt peaceful, not empty. That was new to her. Silence had always meant loneliness. Now it felt like rest. But with every peaceful moment came fear. She noticed how people watched them. Some women whispered behind their hands. Some men shook their heads. The looks made her stomach twist. She had lived her whole life knowing where she stood in this town. Now that place felt uncertain, and uncertainty scared her. One afternoon, as she carried feed across the yard, she heard laughter near the well. She didn't mean to listen, but her name drifted on the wind. "What does he see in her?" someone said. "She's strong, sure, but she's not the kind of woman a man stays for," another voice answered. Her hands tightened around the sack until her fingers hurt. She walked away without looking back, her chest burning. She told herself not to care. She had heard worse before. But this time the words cut deeper because now she had something to lose. That evening, she avoided Eli. She finished her work quickly and walked home alone. The sky was dark when she reached her house. She sat on the porch, trying to slow her breathing, trying to push the thoughts away. "This is why you never hoped," she told herself. "This is why you never let anyone close." Footsteps approached. She knew the sound of them now. "You left early," Eli said softly. She didn't look at him. I was tired. You all right? He asked, sitting a few steps away. She stayed quiet. He waited. Finally, the words spilled out, heavy and sharp. People are talking. He nodded.
They always do. They're laughing, she said. At you.
At me. I don't care, he said. I do, she whispered. He looked at her then. Really looked. Why? She stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the wood. Because this isn't real, she said, her voice shaking. You don't belong here. You don't belong with me. Eli stood too, but he didn't move closer. Tell me why, he said gently. She laughed, but it broke halfway through. You don't see it, do you? She said. I'm not like other women.
I never was. I'm too big.
I take up too much space. I work like a man because that's all I'm good for. I'm not someone you choose. I'm someone you use. The words poured out like water breaking through a dam. Years of pain, years of silence, all spilling at once. Eli didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face calm, his eyes steady. She wiped her face roughly. This will end, she said. And when it does, I'll be the one left standing alone again. I can't do that. Not again. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. Look at me, Eli said. She didn't want to, but something in his voice made her turn. I see you, he said. She shook her head. No, you see what you want. No, he said firmly. I see a woman who works harder than anyone I've ever met. I see someone who gives without counting the cost. I see strength, yes, but I also see kindness. And I see loneliness because no one ever stopped long enough to notice you. Her breath caught. You think being strong makes you unlovable, he continued. But that strength is what drew me to you. Tears ran down her face, silent and hot. She didn't try to stop them. I'm afraid, she whispered. So am I, he said. But I'd rather be afraid with you than walk away. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into his words and let them carry her. But fear was louder. You'll leave, she said. Everyone does. He stepped closer then. Just one step. I'm still here, he said. That night, she slept little. Her mind replayed every word, every look, every moment. She felt raw, like her skin had been peeled back. She had never said those things out loud before. Saying them made them real, and that scared her more than keeping them hidden ever had. The next day, she tried to act normal. She worked, she avoided his eyes, she kept moving. But something between them had changed. The wall she had built was cracked, and light was coming through whether she wanted it or not. Later that afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. The wind picked up, and the sky turned dark. One of the horses broke loose, spooked by the thunder. Without thinking, she ran after it, rain soaking her clothes, mud pulling at her boots. The horse slipped near the old fence and went down hard, trapped and frightened. She grabbed the rein, speaking softly, trying to calm it. The rain poured, her arms shaking with effort. Then Eli was there, helping her, his shoulders steady against hers. Together, they freed the horse and led it back to safety. When it was over, they stood in the rain, breathing hard. You could have been hurt, he said.
So could you, she answered. He looked at her, water running down his face.
That's the point, he said. We do things together. She felt something shift then, deep inside her. Not fear, not pain. Trust. It was small, fragile, but it was there. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The town would talk. The doubts would return. The old voice in her head would still whisper that she was too much, too big, too different. But for the first time, another voice was growing louder, and it said, maybe you were never unlovable at all. The storm left the land quiet, like the world was holding its breath. The next morning, the air smelled clean, and the sky was wide and blue again. But inside the town, things felt tense. People spoke in low voices. They watched more closely than before. Something was changing. and everyone could feel it. The woman felt it too. She walked through town with her head high, even though her heart was beating fast. The rain from the night before had washed away the dust, but not the whispers. She heard them as she passed. She didn't need to understand the words. She already knew what they were about. Still, she kept walking. Eli walked beside her, steady and calm, like he had every right to be there. He didn't touch her hand, didn't pull her closer. He just walked with her, matching her steps. That simple thing gave her strength. They reached the stable and she began her work, like always. But the peace she had started to feel was about to be tested. A loud shout broke the morning air. A group of horses had broken through the far fence. They ran wild toward the open land, fear driving them fast. The town depended on those horses for work, for travel, for everything. Panic spread quickly. Men ran, shouting, grabbing ropes. Some froze, unsure what to do. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Her boots hit the ground hard as she chased after the horses, her breath burning in her chest. She had handled animals all her life. She knew their fear, knew how they moved when they panicked. She shouted softly, guiding them, pushing them away from danger. Eli ran with her, not ahead, not behind, beside. One horse slipped near the riverbank, its legs sliding on the wet earth. Without thinking, she rushed forward and grabbed the reins, pulling with all her strength. The animal fought, scared and heavy, but she held on. Mud covered her clothes, her arms shaking, her muscles screaming. Someone shouted her name. She felt the horse slow, then stop. The danger passed. The town stood still, watching. She turned and saw them all staring. Men, women, children. Their faces looked different now. Not judgment, not pity. Respect. Eli stepped forward, his voice clear. She saved them. No one argued. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a worker, not as a strong body, but as someone brave, someone valuable. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, the town gathered near the main road. It was something they did only in moments that mattered. People stood close, murmuring, waiting. She stood near the edge, unsure why she was there. Eli walked forward.
I didn't come here planning to stay, he said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. I came for water, then for work.
But I found something I wasn't looking for. He turned toward her. I found a woman who gives everything she has without asking for anything back. A woman who carries more than anyone should and still stands strong. The air went still. I choose her, he said. Not because she's perfect, not because she fits anyone's idea. I choose her because she is real. Her heart hammered. Her hands shook. The town watched. Some people smiled. Some looked surprised. Some wiped their eyes. Eli walked to her and held out his hand. Not pulling, not forcing. For a moment she stood frozen. Years of fear held her in place. Then, years of believing she was too much, too different, too big. Then she took his hand. The world didn't end. Instead, something inside her finally rested. From that day on, things changed. Slowly, not all at once. People spoke to her differently. They thanked her. They asked her opinion. Children ran to her without fear. The whispers faded, replaced by respect. She still worked hard. She was still strong. But now, she wasn't alone. Some nights, she sat on her porch with Eli beside her, watching the sky darken. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of peace. She still had doubts. They didn't disappear like magic. Some nights she would wake up afraid, thinking this life would vanish, and Eli would sit with her until the fear passed, never rushing, never leaving. The miracle wasn't loud or shining. It was quiet and steady, like the land itself. Time moved differently after that. The days still began with the sun and ended with the stars, but they felt lighter, like the world had shifted just enough to make breathing easier. The woman still woke early, still worked hard, still carried the weight of the land on her shoulders, but now she didn't carry it alone. Eli stayed. At first, people expected him to leave. Travelers always did. They waited for his horse to be packed, for dust to rise behind him on the road. But the days turned into weeks, and he was still there, fixing fences, helping neighbors, laughing with children. Slowly, the town accepted what was happening. This was no passing moment. This was a new beginning. For the woman, the change came quietly. It wasn't a sudden feeling of joy or a loud celebration. It was in the small things. In the way Eli waited for her before walking, in the way he listened when she spoke, even about the simplest things, in the way he looked at her like she was something rare, not something strange. Some nights, she still felt the old fear. It would come when the house was quiet and the wind was loud. The voice would whisper, "This won't last. He will see the truth. He will leave." But each time Eli would be there, sitting beside her, reminding her without words that she was safe. One evening as they sat on the porch, she finally spoke the truth she had carried for so long. "I spent my whole life believing I was too much," she said softly. "Too big, too strong, too different." Eli didn't answer right away. He just took her hand, warm and steady.
"You were never too much," he said.
"You were just waiting for someone who could see you." The words settled deep inside her like a seed finally finding soil. As the seasons changed, so did she. Her shoulders still held strength, but her heart held peace. She laughed more. She rested when she needed to. She stopped hiding herself in plain clothes and tight hair. She didn't need to shrink anymore. The town changed too. Young girls watched her and saw something new. A woman who was strong and still loved, who worked hard and was still chosen. Old men nodded to her with respect. Women spoke to her openly now, without distance. The story of the woman who thought she was unlovable became a quiet lesson, passed in small words and long looks. Eli and the woman built a life together. Not fast, not loud, but steady. They fixed the old house, board by board. They planted a small garden behind it. They shared meals, stories, and silence. They argued sometimes, but they always came back to each other, choosing again and again to stay. One morning she stood in the field watching the sunrise, the light spreading gold across the land. She realized something then. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not for approval, not for love, not for permission to exist. She was already home. Years later, people would still talk about that time, about the cowboy who stayed, about the woman who learned her worth. They didn't call it a miracle because it wasn't magic. It was something stronger. It was patience. It was kindness. It was seeing someone clearly and refusing to look away. And when the woman looked back on her life, she no longer saw the lonely years as proof that she was unlovable. She saw them as the road that led her here. To love, to peace, to herself.